Welcome back to Bedwars, the show where I play Bedwars bad and hope that my commentary distracts you from how poorly I'm doing. But quite honestly, I think I'm improving a little bit from last time. I've been playing a little bit more in between, watching some Gamer Boy 80, Purple, Technoblade, and honestly, my speed bridging has improved. Still not the best at PvP though, because I play on 1.16 because it's much easier for me to do that than to switch to 1.8.9 on my laptop. It just lags far more, but maybe eventually. It's all a bit of a progress. You'll see me have some kills here and there and break, I think, 2 or 3 beds here, but nothing clutch, nothing serious. Just trying to get some gameplay in before school starts. But that's besides the point. Let's get to the topic at hand, which stems from Facebook memories reminding me of what they have gathered from me. And I was reminded of a debate tournament that I participated in quite a while back in Thailand. If you watched the last episode, you'll know that I used to be in debate club, and no, I wasn't cool. Yes, I thought I was cool, and yes, I thought I was on top of the world, but retrospectively, I was not, and I don't like to think about it that way, but I like to think about the experiences that I made. Regardless, seeing those photos and the people that I met and all the stories that were associated with like each tournament and occurrence brought back a lot of memories. And one of those memories kind of tied into something that I've been thinking about and a logical fallacy I learned in my university's logic and critical thinking class. And that's the idea of a slippery slope. If you don't know what a slippery slope is, let me explain it to you in noun terms. A slippery slope is essentially saying that an action's outcome will always be the worst, no matter what you do, and each worst outcome will lead to another worst outcome. It's essentially assuming the worst of everything and every possible solution. Now, context for why I thought of this is because I saw photos from a tournament that I was adjudicating or judging, and the schools that were participating in the tournament were fairly new to the debate scene. It was kind of a tournament established for just those people. So schools with more experience would send their best debaters and judges to help judge the debate, which is how I was involved. And so I think in the second round of that day, I was adjudicating between two fairly younger age teams. And the motion was something along the lines of, this house would prohibit the publishing of terrorist-related news. And I think as proposition, you're trying to argue that this could be detrimental towards national security. If people were to be informed of things, it could lead to recruitment opportunities, things that aren't slippery slopes. While the opposition side obviously is arguing for the right for the public to know of any potential threats and securities. And so that's the essential argument, the essential principle of safety and national security. The proposition side, however, had an argument which was titled slippery slope, and they elaborated that it would lead to a economic depression and massive suicide rates if the government were to allow news organizations to publish terrorist related news. You may be wondering how they got to that conclusion. I certainly was too when I was listening to their introduction for the arguments. And then they elaborated that if the government, and I'm quoting, shortening this, paraphrasing this, they elaborated that if the government were to allow news organizations to publish this, news organizations would instill fear into citizens. And because citizens are fearful of terrorist-related incidents, they would lock themselves home and they would not go shopping, causing shops to shut down. And then the people who own the shops would go into bankruptcy, and that crashed the whole economic system if no one's supporting businesses. And all the people who own the shops will commit suicide. And then when terrorist related incidents are no longer prevalent, then the people will have no shops to shop at, and then the government will be overwhelmed because the government will have to try to provide to the people. And subsequently, when the people can't get their resources or food or anything from the government, then they will fall into depression and there will be large amounts of suicide. I'm sure that most people that are watching this are fairly more advanced in age, and I don't blame them at all. I'm sure as kids you think of slippery slopes all the time, and it's probably common to assume the worst of every possible solution. However, if you're not sure why that argument isn't valid or why a slippery slope is a logical fallacy, because it inherently assumes the worst outcome possible. Just because news organizations decide to show terror-related news doesn't mean that the people who consume that news are automatically going to be fearful and lock themselves in. And even if they do lock themselves in, there are essentials which are needed to be purchased by people. So they go to grocery stores, they go to places, and the fear will subsequently die down without any major incident reigniting fear. The argument they made assumes that every reaction or every answer will have the worst possible outcome, and they assume so until the world inevitably self-implodes and we are nothing but a black hole, which, to be fair, is an extreme example. I'm sure everyone's familiar with Murphy's Law that states that anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and I understand. Wrong outcomes happen all the time. I'm sure in some simulation that you run enough times that news organizations releasing terrorist news do lead to economic depressions. It can go wrong, but that doesn't mean it will go wrong every single time. There's an independent paradigm every time a situation like this occurs, and remembering that led me to apply the slippery slope in a different context, because I think it's true with everyone. You don't have to do a massive grand scale of government action, but you can do it as an individual and your actions. I'm sure everyone's guilty of this, where they always assume that the worst outcome will keep happening to them and that they'll never get anything done, and they don't get anything done. I've done that before. Let me give you some probably more relatable examples of my own experiences with the slippery slope in retrospect. When I was a kid, like between the ages of 9 to 12, whenever we went out to eat, there was like that one in maybe like 10 time occurrence where they wouldn't give me my utensils, or I was missing some condiments, or there was something missing from like the menu set. And I was scared that if I spoke up and asked about it, that they would just shun me or look at me negatively or think I was causing a fuss and kick us out of the restaurant. So sometimes I would just be quiet, or sometimes I would tell my parents to do it, and the outcome would always be that they just brought it to us. They never kicked us out, but somehow for me, I thought that if I did it myself, that I would be bothering the waiter and it would kick us out and it would cause a huge ruckus. Which never happened, obviously. That was an overreaction by my thought, and that's a more childish example, and it's true that you think that way. Kids tend to think more so in extremities. And that extremity that, oh, if I just tell them that I get the wrong food, they're going to end up kicking us out of the restaurant as a final result, never happened. And I doubt that has ever happened unless you're probably lying about it or the restaurant is already a 1-star review place anyway. Another one that people might relate to a bit more is when me and one other person in one of my classes did the group project by ourselves. There were supposed to be 6 people in the group, and there was 6 people in the group. And this occurred when COVID hit America and we had to transition to online courses. Once we transitioned to online courses, there was only me and one other girl who was doing any work. The other 4 kind of just vanished, and it was unfair to us because we had to grade them accordingly, and they were saying that they wanted to give everyone an A because it would make it easier on them and they wouldn't have to worry about the class. Now, obviously, I think that people who put in the appropriate amount of work, especially in the second half of the semester, should be treated fairly, and people who didn't should also be treated fairly. And the thing is, the group had to come to a decision whether the entire group would evaluate each person, or each person would evaluate the entire group. There wasn't really a clear outline of the syllabus if we could do an in-between. So I didn't want to cause like a fracture in the group, or I didn't want to cause anything because we still had like 2 weeks to go. And I thought that if I told my professor, who is fairly a stern person, that he wouldn't care and that he'd just say pick one or the other or you have to confront them. And I was scared that if I requested him to do the in-between where they can just do the group evaluation and I can do each individual's evaluation, that he would think I'm picky, that he would think I'm nagging. And then I would get a talking to, or I would get a lecture about how this isn't real life. And that made me hesitate asking him for a little bit. And the other girl messaged me, the girl who did the rest of the work when we transitioned online, and she said that she's going to set up a meeting time with my professor and that she wants to know my availability so we can talk to him. And I didn't want to tell her that I was thinking of all the worst outcomes possible, so I just gave her the time I was available. And between that, I was thinking heavily about, oh no, He's just going to tell us to suck it up, and after he tells us to suck it up, he's going to have a poor view of me, and he's not going to be able to understand our point and just say that this is the real world and, give us that adulty lecture. He didn't have a negative reaction or negative view of us. Instead, he told us that we could do individual reviews of other people and they could just stick with their group review. The meeting was fairly short. There wasn't anything else brought up besides how was your day. And to this day, I have a very positive relationship with him in his classes. I worried about that a lot, and I thought that, oh no, this is going to fracture my relationship with this professor. And it didn't. I didn't let the first thing happen first, which is just ask him and then see what the outcome is. Instead, I assumed that the outcome would be worse and thought that it's not worth trying in the first place, which is ridiculous. This doesn't mean don't prepare for the worst. You should prepare for the worst, but don't make the worst set outcome of what's going to happen. If I had talked to him sooner or talked to the other girl sooner about setting up the meeting, then I could have stopped worrying about my grade in the class and I could have focused on other assignments. Obviously, preparing for the worst in that situation would be acknowledging that he could just make us go with the group evaluation, and I would have prepared my mental capacity for that, that I might get a B or a C in the class. But that outcome shouldn't deter me from trying in the first place, and I don't think it should deter anyone. Thinking in slippery slopes is dangerous, and I think it inhibits a lot of people. And obviously, be responsible with your initial action in the first place. This doesn't mean that you can go drink and drive or get high and drive and think that, oh, if I take this left really slow, I can prepare for the worst outcome. No, your initial action has to be something that isn't already bad, and then you can gauge each reaction accordingly. So don't let your thoughts prevent you from doing something that you feel like could have a positive outcome. Preparing for the worst means nothing if you don't actually do something to see what the outcome can be. That's all for this episode. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you have a good day, good night, wherever you're watching this, whenever you're watching this, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.